Welcome to Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 140.
You will not be successful as a grazer if you can't learn to have an appreciation and understanding for the nutritional value of quality grazed forage and what it can do for the performance of an animal in a relatively economic way. You have to develop that confidence.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, sharing information and stories of grass-based livestock production utilizing regenerative practices. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. You're growing more than grass. You're growing a healthier ecosystem to help your cattle thrive in their environment. You're growing your livelihood by increasing your carrying capacity and reducing your operating costs. You're growing stronger communities and a legacy to last generations. The grazing management decisions you make today impact everything from the soil beneath your feet to the community all around you. That's why the Noble Research Institute created their Essentials of Regenerative Grazing course to teach ranchers like you easy to follow techniques to quickly assess your forage production and infrastructure capacity in order to begin grazing more efficiently. Together, they can help you grow not only a healthier operation, but a legacy that lasts. Learn more on their website at noble.org/grazing. It's noble.org/grazing. On today's show, we have Ted Miller of Delta Dairy. It's located in Louisiana. Just a side note on Louisiana, my wife and I say it differently, and now I'm confused about which way is the correct way because we've talked about it so much. So we're going with Louisiana. At least I am for now. Anyway, Ted has a fairly large grass-based dairy in the lower Mississippi Delta. Very interesting. We talk about their move from Pennsylvania to Louisiana. We talk about how they're dairying, managing forages, etc. It's a really good episode. For the overgrazing section, we dive into virtual collars. We've talked a lot about virtual fence collars on past episodes. Here's a dairy that's using them. They started using them last spring, and they're using Halter brand, which is a little bit different. We've talked about fence brand and I think no fence brand. But Halter is another brand that Ted's using in Louisiana. He talks about how good or how bad it's working. You'll have to listen and find out. On the bonus segment for Grazing Grass Insiders, we talk about planting cool season annuals, how he's doing it, and how that's working for him, and why he chose what he's planting. Like I said before, a good episode. I really enjoyed it. As you all know, I'm a fan of grass-based dairies, so I'm always excited to talk to them. And I think there's something in here for a beef producer, sheep producer, goat producer. And if you're a dairy, obviously you want to stick around. So I think you need to catch it. Before we get to Ted, though, 10 seconds about my farm. I think I told you last week or week before, I have a Spanish buck for sale. Shockingly, no one has called to buy him. Just in case you didn't catch those episodes, I have a Spanish buck for sale. He's a really good buck. I'm really happy with his kids. And recently he's learned a new trick. He can get out of whatever fence I put him in. So if you would like to have like a trick Spanish goat, Spanish buck, get out of whatever pen you want, I've got one for him. I'm holding on to him just until the next auction, and I'll take him over there. I did find me another buck. I'm going to breed him to a boar buck this year and see how that goes. See if I can put a little bit more width, a little bit more meat on those kids. And if you're unfamiliar, I have some Spanish does. And recently, I purchased some fainting goats. So we're going to see how those crosses go and see if I like them. I've wanted fainting goats since I was a kid, and I found opportunity. The price was right, and I purchased just a handful just to try out. I am a little surprised by their stature. I knew they were small, but they're pretty small. Really thick, though. So We'll see how it goes. I, in fact, was looking at a buck to go with him, but when I looked at the buck, I was not a fan of him. So I bought the does, and then I was able to find a boar buck that I really like. So I've got those set up, or I've got them out. I won't be putting the buck with the does till closer to December, so I can have those late April kids. 10 seconds about the podcast. If you're not part of the Grazing Grass community on Facebook, I suggest you join. And you can just go to Facebook, do a search for Grazing Grass Community. Should pop up. It's a very positive community for people wondering about grazing grass, different grazing methods, tools you use, marketing, etc. It's available, and I have to say it's a really good group of people, very positive. One thing I do not see there is the bickering I see in a lot of other groups, and we're going to do our best to keep it that way because I want this to be a positive place for you to ask your questions and get answers from people doing it, as well as have other discussions along that line. So if you're currently a member of the Grazing Grass community, thank you. Thank you for keeping it a positive learning space. And if you're not there, I suggest you join. A great conversation happens there. Enough of that. Let's talk to Ted. Ted, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited you're here today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Ted, to get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation?
Sure. My name's Ted Miller. I'm married to my wife, Melissa. We have four basically grown children. They range in age from 23 down to 18. And we're located in northeast Louisiana, about 50 miles west of the Mississippi River and about 70 miles south of the Arkansas border, right on the center of the lower Mississippi River Delta. We've been here for 15 years. Moved our dairy down here in 2009. We're dairying in central Pennsylvania for about 7 years prior to that, a smaller grass-based dairy up there.
To just get started with that, what get you interested in a grass-based dairy?
Okay, to back up a little bit farther, my wife and I started in full-time farming in 2000. We purchased a small farm in central Pennsylvania. It was actually a bankrupt hog farm is what it was. I was in the hog business before that. I worked for an integrator there in Pennsylvania, so I was familiar with that industry. And we had the opportunity to purchase this farm in 2000. We didn't have the equity we needed to do that, but through FSA real estate loans and just an opportunity to kind of convince the lender we might have an opportunity to help them out with their situation, we were blessed in being able to purchase the farm. So we renovated the hog facilities there, and we started contract finishing pigs for a local integration company there in Pennsylvania. They were marketed in that Hatfield quality meats and southeastern. So that was kind of my background. Growing up in central Pennsylvania, I didn't come from a dairy, but I worked in high school for dairymen in the area and was familiar with the industry as it looked there, and enjoyed that as the rest of had a passion for all elements of agriculture, but was aware of the dairy business. Didn't really see myself probably in that industry at that time. But after we got started there, I continued to work for the integrator, and we finished pigs on the side, and we had about 120 acres of pretty rugged land there. Not great crop ground, but good pasture ground, and wondered, how could we utilize this land a little better? And ironically, in my travels for work, I traveled past a farm in a neighboring county that was set up by the American Farmland Trust as a demonstration farm for a New Zealand grass-based dairy model. Yes. Very interesting. It was odd to me as I drove past this place, and there were Holstein cows out grazing in a very small building with a bulk tank sticking out the end of it. I thought, that looks like dairy, but it doesn't look like dairy. So I had, my curiosity was kind of spiked, and I stopped and got to talk to the tenants there, who actually was who was related to some folks I knew from kind of my hometowns, but made some connection there, but ended up being a family that was served as quite a mentor role for me as we kind of journeyed off into this grass-based area. So I looked at that farm and thought, we could do that here on a smaller scale. So maybe we could milk a few cows on a seasonal grass-based dairy. I wouldn't have to work away. I could stay in the farm full time, that type of thing. So we did that in 2003. We started milking 60 cows, 60 crossbred cows in a little retrofitted swing 12 parlor we put in a building that existed there on the farm. And we started off into the dairy business along with the hog finishing. And we quickly saw that the grass-based dairy seemed to have a lot more growth potential. Didn't have the depreciation attached to it that the hog finishing did.
Oh, yeah.
So we thought, we can really grow this, but we can't do it here. And the same person I mentioned who served as a mentor for me contacted him about his thoughts on how I might feel about growing or relocating in Pennsylvania. And he said that really, if you want to get serious about growing, you probably need to move out of state. And he told me about an individual, Charlie Opitz, who was a retired dairyman who sold out of his portion of his family dairy enterprise and was looking to put a larger scale model together down here in Louisiana on some land that he had acquired, kind of to model that New Zealand type production model here in the States. So as my wife looked over my shoulder and read that email that day, she said, "You can move me anywhere you want to in Pennsylvania, but you're never going to take me to Louisiana." And she's been a Louisiana resident for 15 years now. So interesting how things transpire. But in 2007, 8, 9, in that range, we considered, we looked at the options of selling our farm up there, moving down here, and really it was the providential hand of the Lord allowed those things to happen. And we were able to kind of move forward with that. Our farm sold easily. We did well with that, and we're able to move down here, and we started just on cropland here in the Delta, and you had to build a parlor, convert to pasture, establish some irrigation, those types of things. I mean, there was nothing here, no fencing, no laneways, nothing. So it was quite a journey for several years following that, just putting the infrastructure in to put a model together here. But now, to make a long story short, we're here. We're milking around 600 head on about 1,200 acres fenced, about 700 acres of that irrigated. Opitz and his wife have since sold out of their portion of the partnership we had formed, and it's just my wife and I now and our family that continues to operate Delta Dairy.
Now, I'm going to ask a real, I don't know about a simple question. I'm trying to think about my listeners, and they may not be familiar with a New Zealand style dairy. So when you say in Pennsylvania, there's this New Zealand style, and then that's what you were trying to do.
Sure.
What makes it New Zealand style?
Yeah, it's going to be a dairy production model that does not resemble real closely the typical production model here in North America, where you would have, whether it be a freestall setup or maybe even a dry lot setup in the Southwest, high levels of production, a lot of, high levels of feeding, cows housed, manure handled, those types of things, which would be the typical dairy production model here in the States. New Zealand is quite the opposite. Of course, they're a maritime climate over there. Beautiful pasture land. They're able to grow cool season forages pretty much year round, so their forage quality is very high. So they take advantage of that with dairy production largely, along with other ruminant production. But there's a lot of dairies over there that are grass based, and that would be a dairy that the cows derive the majority of their forage intake needs from grazed pasture. In many cases, they calve seasonally, so their whole herd calves at one time of the year, usually their spring, and then their lactation curve would follow the growth and quality curve of the cool season forages for the year, and then as that becomes less, then they would dry off for a couple months and start the whole cycle over again. We don't have some of the advantages they have in climate, but I would argue that maybe this is one of the areas that's maybe as closely aligned with that as anywhere in the U.S., aside from extreme temperatures, especially on the high side. A lot hotter than they get over there. But with the ability here at our latitude, we can grow grass 10 months of the year, graze it 12 months, and then having some fairly shallow water available, plentiful water available here in the Delta. We can irrigate those pastures, so our forage production potential is pretty high, which helps. But then the other side of that is, like I mentioned, they don't have to deal with high temperatures, and we have
Oh, yeah.
for a good portion of the year we're over 90 degrees. Really, conditions that aren't extremely conducive for or very well conducive for a lactating dairy cow. So we actually calve in the fall. We're just coming through as we're speaking here in October. We're just finishing up our calving season. So we calve in late September, early October, and then we milk through until late July, and then we'll dry off for the months of August and early September, which is the least friendly time of year here because it's extremely hot and forage quality is very poor and those types of things. So grass based seasonal production, cows outside, minimal housing, minimal feed handling, virtually no manure handling, much lower production. We're going to get half the production or maybe less than what a confinement Holstein cow is going to produce here in North America.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of a description of the differences of what the New Zealand model would look like compared to the North American model.
And you went to September, October calving to avoid that hot, humid weather, as well as take advantage of cool season forages.
That's right. Yeah, really. The thing about the South, we can produce a lot of forage, and a big chunk of that is like dry cow feed. We
Oh,
produce a
yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
mediocre forage. It's an interesting dynamic, especially when you're dealing with something that demands higher quality. So we really need to target that, and try to get those winter annual forages that we can plant here over our warm season perennials, and take advantage of those cooler temperatures. Breeding cows when it's nice and cool in December here. All those things that working with Mother Nature, not against her. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When you moved from PA to Louisiana, that's a big change. Did you take your cows from Pennsylvania down, or did you sell everything in Pennsylvania, go down to Louisiana, and then I may have answered my own question. You didn't move cows down. You didn't have a barn when you moved down there.
That's a really good question. We actually did move our cows down.
Oh, well.
We moved our cows and machinery, and would have sold our real estate and of course our fixed assets up there. But everything else did come down, and that was a chore I'd probably only want to do one time. We're very blessed in that I forget how many loads of cattle ended up being with young stock, and we moved about 100 milking down. So it was
Oh, yes.
100 milking plus supporting young stock, and we're very blessed. We didn't even have a single animal even carry a leg off a trailer, so we were very thankful that went as well as it did. Don't think I'd want to try it again and hope for those same results, but it was interesting. We moved them down in September, which is an interesting month down here because it can be very late summer hot type weather, or less likely, but can be moving into kind of a fall, a fall more seasonal type, more comfortable weather. That particular year in 2009, September was exceptionally cool here. So
Oh, yes.
it really worked out nice. It was kind of very little transition for the cows. But then, of course, as time went by, I think the genetics have definitely, as genetics do, they sort themselves out, and
Yeah.
the ones that can acclimate to the warmer climate do better.
So you were able to move those cows down when they were dry before they were in milk.
Actually, we spring calved that year. It was an interesting
Okay.
year. As you bring this up, I guess I tried to bury some of the stuff in my mind so I wouldn't have to think of it. But yeah, we spring calved in '09. So we had a herd of cows that was about halfway through lactation or more, probably 2/3 stale. So they came down, and then prior to that, in 2008, we purchased a bunch of open heifers out of New York State, Holstein Jersey. They were kind of some byproducts of some of the larger dairies up there were breeding their heifers Jersey. So we had a two-way cross we had available. We could purchase these as open animals, brought them down, and bred them the winter of '08 '09, and then they were set to calve in that fall. So here
Oh,
we are
yeah.
in September of '09 with a half stale herd, heifers calving, facility, never quite ready. You know how that goes, and that's a fall we don't need to repeat anytime soon. But we made it. We're here to talk about it, so we're
Yeah.
we're,
Well,
we're glad.
that's great. So we dairied with my grandparents, and then my dad put in his own dairy 2 miles away from my grandparents, and of course we were milking year round. So we moved those cows down as soon as we finished one morning milking. We separated them off, hauled them down 2 miles until we evening milk down here. And it was a mess. So, and we were going 2 miles. So I can only imagine the logistics and how it all worked out to move them across the country. So,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was interesting. Yeah, but cattle are resilient. It's
they
amazing.
are.
You take a crossbred cow. She's a pretty hardy girl, and yeah, they took it well. But there's definitely a few wrinkles, and it takes a little time to smooth them all out. But they all do eventually.
Well, you mentioned crossbred there, and you mentioned you'd purchased some Jersey Holstein cows. What kind of breeds are you going for? What kind of bulls are you using to get cows to excel in your system?
Yeah, that's an interesting story itself. When we got started back in 2003 in Pennsylvania, when we first started in the dairy business, we had those Holstein Jersey type animals that were pretty available. And you love crossbreds and you want to keep crossbreeding, but how do you do it? That's the big question. How do you do it in
Right.
a way that makes sense? So we really didn't know what we were doing. So we actually for probably every year we were up there we would take and we set up all of our March calvers, which would be like our first 30-day calvers in our calving season. And we set them up like a pre-sync offsite and did a
Oh,
timed
yeah.
AI. And then we just put some cleanup bulls in a few days later. So we were able to utilize some AI without it extending real far into June and stuff like that. So as far as genetics, we didn't know what we wanted to do, so we just picked a breed and we just bred with a different breed every year. Like we used New
Oh,
Zealand Friesian, we used Swedish Red, Montbéliard, Brown Swiss, New Zealand Jersey, really nothing, everything we could find that wasn't North American
oh,
is
yeah.
kind of what we did. So then we come down here and we switch to a fall seasonal calving schedule. So we'll be breeding everything in December. Well, this is an area where there's no dairy, so there's no AI support work or anything like very
Oh,
little.
yeah.
And it's December and there's more important things to do like go deer hunting and all that kind of stuff. So you can't find any help to breed cows. So we're like, what are we going to do? Well, we figured we got our hands on some crossbred bulls and we just full breed till we figured this out.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
that was 15 years ago, and we're still just full breeding everything.
Oh,
So we actually we've been completely closed for about 10 years. So we take all that genetic diversity that we kind of put together, hodgepodge, and that was our herd. And then we just selected bulls out of there from cow lines that we like, try to be as diverse as we can with those lines.
oh, yeah.
And we've just used a composite internally produced crossbred bull. They do a great job getting cows bred quickly, and we like what we're working with. So these are all things that the industry kind of shuns, but it's
Yes.
just it's
Yeah, it
just what
would.
we do. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not here to make some kind of statement, but it has worked well for us. We're real pleased with what we're seeing. So it's pretty simple. Breeding's pretty simple. We just put the bulls in.
Yeah. Whatever works in your context doesn't mean it may work for someone else. It may not work, but it's working for you. Which, so as you closed your herd about 10 years ago, and as you look at your herd, can you see some of those different breed influences carrying out that may be more prevalent now that's worked better? Or is it meshed and merged into its own type more, and you couldn't really say, oh, that's from the Swedish Red we had, or the Montbelair. I'm not saying that.
Montbéliard, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You'd love to think that we're going to have this perfectly aligned composite cross that's evenly distributed across all these great breeds, and we both know that that doesn't work that way.
Right.
But it does kind of to a point. But it is interesting. Like some of the, for example, Larger cattle seem to leave a little quicker, or
Oh, yes.
brown Swiss, Montbéliard, those that were heavily influenced that way for whatever reason. It wasn't something that we manipulate or anything like that.
Right.
It does seem like we've kind of settled into a little shorter, stouter, thicker type animal, maybe a little bit more Frisian type animal,
Oh,
maybe
yes.
that stature and a little thicker like that. That seems to, and I'm guessing that's climate that probably
Oh,
drives
yeah.
what stays. So our typical cow's now gonna be probably 1,000 pounds when she calves, and maybe 1,150. That dry off, something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of a medium sized cow, but there's plenty of diversity and unpredictability, I guess you'd say, that goes with that many breeds represented. You'll have a calf that's like, that looks like a purebred Jersey. Where'd that come from? We
Oh,
haven't bred,
yes.
for years, but so I guess it's kind of we're taking the genetic approach of really just kind of letting stuff do what it's going to do, and what's going to thrive here thrive, and hopefully that's an animal that that's acceptable for us, and so far that seems to be the case.
I this term's not going to be correct or anything, but I like to think of it as you're doubling down on your cows. I know people talk about, you can take 3 generations of bulls and just completely change your cow herd. Well, what if your cow herd, and this is more towards beef people, what if your cow herd is what you like? Double down on your cows, keep your own bulls, and then you're expanding the influence of the genetics of your best cows in your herd and keeping that in, because you may not want to change your herd in 3 generations.
Oh yeah,
So,
that's such
yeah.
an accurate statement. That's absolutely a lot of our philosophy. We want to see, we want to take those traits of the cows that are at the middle of that bell-shaped curve. We don't want, we're not breeding for milk. We're not breeding, we have
Right.
a minimum that we would tolerate as far as production. We're
Right.
not breeding for the top end of milk. We're not really breeding for the top end of anything. We want those ones that are thriving the best here.
Right.
And then that even brings into the discussion, like epigenetics and what
Oh,
effect the
yeah.
climate has on genetic expression, which I've found to be absolutely intriguing. The same genetics up north mature and behave differently down here than what they did up there, which just blew my mind. A couple examples of that would be, we would always debud our calves up there at about 8 weeks old. And we came down here and started calving in these conditions, especially the last trimester of gestation. It's 95 degrees every
Oh,
day.
yeah.
Whether that's the impact, whether that's the fact that it's affecting or not, I don't know. But these calves now, we have to be out there around 12 weeks before we can even feel a bud to
Oh, yes.
dehorn. Just
Interesting.
really, yeah, I found it to be
Yeah.
incredibly interesting. And then the other end of that is on our replacement heifers. We would always breed at 15 months or something like that up there, and calve in at around 2 years. And here, these animals, they hold good flesh, they look fine, they just look so immature, way too immature breed at that age.
Oh, yes.
So we actually it took us a few years to kind of come on board with this, but we actually have switched to we breed at 2 years old and calve at 3 years old. Again, just something the industry would not tolerate at all, but it's just what happens to work here. And again, is that some sort of epigenetic expression based on what the climate does, impact, how it impacts the cow? I don't know, but we're just trying to observe these things and take note of them, and follow them rather than try to bend them to conform what we want to do.
Oh, yes. And I would assume you're growing your heifers out on forage only. So that's going to reduce that growth rate somewhat, depending on what you're giving
Basically,
them.
yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of grazing. And one thing about the Southern forage model is there's some real flat spots in forage quality for anything like a young heifer or a lactating cow. And fall is a real tough time as far as forage quality. So we'll keep our calves will be on free choice grain the first winter. Then they'll go on
Oh,
all
yeah.
forage at about 6 months old. And then we actually bring those yearlings We actually put them back on self feeders for a few months that first fall when they're 1 year old, because it seems to
Oh,
be a
okay.
very susceptible time for them as far as holding condition on very low quality forage. In fact, one thing that's really interesting is we run our yearlings with our 2 year olds. Both are open groups.
Okay.
So we will graze them together through the summer. And then as you're moving into late summer and fall and forage quality really falls apart, those 2 year olds just stay butterball slick and the yearlings really start going backwards.
Huh.
Seems to be maybe I'm guessing just maybe rumen size. The bigger heifer
Oh,
can
yeah.
can take more low quality forage in and metabolize that, and the younger heifer can, I'm guessing. But again, we can't answer exactly why, but we sure have observed it, and we're going to try to react to it appropriately to
Oh,
mitigate
yes.
the negative effect. Yeah.
I'd love to talk more about the cows, but let's transition just a little bit and talk about your forages, what you're grazing. I know you moved down there in '09.
Yep.
Yes, in '09. What did it look like for forage base that you were starting from?
As far as the forage base we were starting from, there was nothing here because it was row crop land, and we were converting row crop land to pasture. And that was a journey in itself, because we thought that, if you're familiar with the South, warm season perennials are kind of king. Bermuda grass,
Oh,
Bahia
yeah.
grass, those types of things. And then typically you're going to overseed with ryegrass or a small grain for a window of higher quality forage in the wintertime. Well, we thought here in North Louisiana, surely we can get fescue to grow, because if we can get a cool season perennial to grow this far south, that's the holy grail, right? Now
Oh, yeah.
you have that quality and you have a perennial form. And we tried that for 10 years, for 8 years anyway, probably trying to get fescue. How are we going to keep fescue here? You plant it and it looks great for like 2 years, and then it just falls apart. It can't
Oh, yes.
can't seem to handle the length of time of hot, humid weather, hot, humid nights. The summer is just too long and hard on it. Boy, we tried. We
Oh,
spent a lot of
yes.
money, a lot of time, but we gave up on that when we realized that we couldn't make it work. So we went to an improved hybrid Bermuda as our warm season perennial base across the whole farm. Russell Bermuda is actually what we're using.
Oh,
And then we overseed with broadcast ryegrass and drilled oats on about 2/3 of the acreage for winter grazing, winter
oh,
supplement,
yes.
bring the quality in. We can grow clover here. Clover's a big component, really, especially as your window of high quality forage goes away at either end. It's you have that clover quality or that clover component in there, and you can carry that quality out several more weeks, especially in the late spring. So we welcome that, and we try to enhance that as much as we can through seed setting and things. In fact, we got several years ago, we actually got in the honeybee business as well, because just to try to pollinate our clover better. So we have, and like dairy farmers do, if milking 20 cows is fun, 200's got to be a blast. So we can't have two beehives. We have a couple hundred now,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're off the farm and stuff. But I think our original objective was to see more honeybees in the pastures. We've definitely accomplished that, and I think it's had a huge positive impact on our clover seed setting capability. So, that's something we're really happy with. It doesn't cost
Oh,
money,
yeah.
you want to try to, you know, initiate that as much as you can as far as that self seeding of the legumes. So we're not actually buying any clover seed right now to overseed. We're just relying on the self seeding of the plants that are out there, and then the
Oh,
cows, of
yeah.
course, they do a great job of moving those hard seeds around when with aggressive rotational grazing and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much the basics of what our forage program looks like.
And then, well, first off, before we move off the forage, are you planting any warm season annuals in there?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that question. We're not, and it is
Oh, yeah.
it is a climate that sorghum Sudan does great
Oh, yeah.
here. Crabgrass, those types of things. It's interesting in the South, or at least this far south, where you have water, anywhere you're irrigating, those the warm season is long enough that the crabgrass and some millets and even Johnson grass tends to really come on its own. So
Oh, yeah.
we're really trying to leverage that volunteer summer annual grasses, that are largely considered weeds in some circles, but is very digestible forage, especially in the warm season. So we try to leverage that as much as we can. We definitely want to see those forages coming, and the water helps bring them. So we try to promote that as much as we can, and that's definitely in June and early July as we're getting toward the end of lactation. Those are definitely we can make more milk on summer annuals than we can Bermuda grass that time of year because more digestible.
Oh, yeah. With your forages and your grazing, how are you managing your cows and where they're grazing?
Yeah, without having a map up to show you, which would make it a little bit easier, but to kind of describe our main dairy platform, we would have our milking center is right in the middle of about 1,000 acre block.
Oh, okay.
And then on either side of the milking center, the milking parlor, we have two of our larger pivots, center pivots. One's a 300 acre pivot on the east side and a 200 acre pivot on the west side. So two big circles with the milk parlor right in the center. And then we would move out and we could, we have those fields pretty much divided up, kind of pie shaped type configuration where
Oh, yeah.
we had our cow lane went around. There was a circle under each pivot, and off of that circle lane, we could hit whatever paddocks we wanted to, and worked pretty well. We typically have not done a lot of polywire subdivision. We kind of set the paddock sizes to what our milking herd was going to be, and then we basically managed residuals with leader follower groups, or heifer
Oh,
groups,
okay.
bull group, those types of things, and worked pretty well. Wasn't optimal with grass utilization, but it got the job done as far as basically getting the residuals we were looking for. Now, I say all that in the last year, last spring to be exact, we put virtual fence collars on our cows, which has really been a game changer for us. We took out a lot of our cross fences and have much bigger paddocks now, but we just we can break those cows virtually, into whatever paddock sizes we want them to be. So that's kind of how we're managing the cows now. But we're able to rotate more aggressively, take residuals down to the levels we want to, more so than we could before. But yeah, to answer your question simply would be we want to rotate. We're rotationally grazing, as aggressively as we can, moving cattle as often as we can,
Oh, yeah.
to try to get that fastest regrowth that we can get, and again without going in and taking that second bite, on that grass before it's able to regrow. Basically we're trying to mimic the buffalo herd. We want to keep the cows moving. We'll have maximum pressure for the shortest duration period of time, and then the longest rest possible before we come back. Seems to be not only the best from a forage utilization standpoint for cow performance, but also from a soil health standpoint too.
One thing we didn't talk about earlier, how many times a day are you milking?
We are milking twice.
I see.
Yeah, we start out with twice a day when we calve, and then we actually do the last 60 to 80 days of lactation. We have been the past several years moving to a modified, like a 3-and-2 type schedule where we'll milk
Oh, yes.
once one day, twice the next day, and that's worked really well because we don't seem to lose much production from what we would have been at. Yeah, somatic cell still stays in line more so than it seems like it did when we tried just going cold turkey to like once a day. And it allows us to manage our labor a little bit more efficiently and those types of things. So we've really enjoyed that modified schedule the
Oh, yeah.
last quarter of lactation.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump back to your fencing just a little bit. I want to get that in there about milking schedule because I just wasn't sure about it. I assumed twice a day, but I see I follow a guy on YouTube that does once a day milking, which I think is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
But
It
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it is. It's very, and we're drawn to more of the less frequent milking. It seems like certain times of the year as we start to warm up, somatic cell can be more of a challenge. So we're trying to, manage against that, making sure that stays in line. But yeah, that kind of goes with the grazing mindset. We can utilize grass more, be more labor efficient,
Oh,
and
yeah.
still get a level of milk production that's acceptable. I think our margin in this type of models better with, in some cases, less frequent milking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, let's transition to the overgrazing section sponsored by Redmond. At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com. And we just talked a little bit about it, was your virtual fence collars. So I think you said you started that last spring?
That's correct. Yeah, this
Yes.
past April of 2024 is when we collared our first cows, and a little bit of background on that whole journey. About 2 years ago, I reached out to a New Zealand company by the name of Halter. They
Oh,
were
okay.
they were a young virtual fence company at that time, just been in business for a few years. That's where kind of everybody's been in that space. It's been pretty new since that's come out.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I read about them in the New Zealand Dairy Exporter, and thought I'll reach out and see if I could talk to somebody. I'm sure it's not available in the States, but it'd be cool to talk to them. So started talking with an individual from there, and as it turned out, they aspired to come to the States. They weren't here yet, but they aspired to bring their collars over here at some point in the future. So we started talking about what that would look like here, and all those types of things. So again, to make a long story short, it was 2 years of that, really a year and a half of them kind of getting to a point where they could launch over here. That worked out good. It kind of gave us an opportunity to really digest that whole thing and say, okay, what's this maybe going to look like here? Is
Oh,
this
yeah.
something that's going to fit for us? It was nice to be able to kind of take that slow and methodical, still being an unknown. You don't know, but at least you can think about it a little longer. So when they were ready this spring, we were ready. So we set up the infrastructure here, which is just two towers on the farm that communicate with the collars. They're solar powered. Both the collars and the towers are solar powered,
Oh,
and the towers make their own Wi-Fi as far as their communication with the collar. So it's pretty independent of, you don't need Wi-Fi across the farm or something like anything like that. They do rely on us. I think it's a cell signal maybe that lets them
oh,
do
yeah.
that. But yeah, these are solar powered collar that allow you to virtually break and control the cattle as far as anywhere you could polywire cattle. You can, with your phone, you can just draw the brakes and hold the cattle virtually. They also will virtually shift the cattle from paddock to the milking parlor or from paddock to paddock, which is a great feature.
Oh, yes.
And it's watching the cows adapt to this has been really, really just an amazing experience. And I guess I need to give the cows credit for being a lot smarter now than what I always thought they were.
Oh, yes.
But they actually, there's a series of prompts that they get through tone,
Oh,
vibration,
yeah.
pulsing vibration, and in an extreme situation of shock that that initiate the cattle to move a certain direction, and you'll take them out a certain gate, and it'll take them to the milking parlor, which is pretty cool because you can set up what time you want to start milking, and then you would you would schedule your shift accordingly so that those cattle would shift and be at the parlor waiting for you when it's time to milk, which is a nice feature for sure, labor saver.
Right, because always when we dairied, someone came down a half hour to an hour if it's summer before milking time to get the cows in,
That's right.
which,
That's right. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. So either, that guy's getting less sleep than everybody else is,
right.
or in our cases, sometimes our guys are, and we're thankful for it. They're pretty aggressive and want to be here. So I try to explain to them that I'm going to go over earlier, get the cows. You guys come over a certain time. Well, I go over, then they go over. So then what that is. That's a couple guys waiting around at the parlor that you're
Oh,
paying to
yeah,
do nothing for a while. So
right.
it has really made that whole thing more efficient. And then alongside that, they're a full activity collar. They're monitoring rumination, grazing time, resting, heat detection, those types of things. That's a really cool thing. We've never used activity collars before, so it's the data that we can get from that is very helpful. And then with coming out of New Zealand, they're so in tune with grass utilization. They're so good at it over there
Oh,
because
yeah.
their land's so high priced. It's a limited resource that they're really good at residuals and utilizing every kilogram for their in their situation, every kg of dry matter they can get over there. So this thing is a whole grass management tool too. Like when you would when you would draw a break for the cattle, it'll tell you exactly how much area each cow has. And now over there, they're actually using satellite imagery to give them free grazing cover estimates. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
the app has a feature where you would take pictures of the residual when you leave the field, and it calculates how much residual you have and then how much you utilized, how much you fed each cow. So as far as it's taken our management, it's cranked it up from where we used to be as far as understanding, grass utilization. So that's kind of cool. And I'm not even using all that stuff. It's not geared quite right for here yet.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to load a lot of residual pictures and through the algorithms and stuff, get those a little more accurate than what they are right now. But it is definitely more. I guess I say all that to say it's definitely more than just a virtual boundary tool.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's a whole forage utilization tool, which I've found to be pretty powerful.
Well, I hadn't even thought about that, to be honest, Ted. I was thinking of it as sure you do some activity monitoring, maybe catch a cow in heat, or if a cow's starting to feel bad, you notice that earlier, but mainly just as a boundary. I hadn't even thought about with that defined boundary, you can do all kinds of calculations on that because you know exactly where they were, how long they were, and if you're using that for all that gives you a lot of potential data at your fingertips.
It really does. Yeah, it has and continues to educate me and grow, my ability as a grazer or grass manager. So that's exciting, you know, that it can do those types of things. And the other thing is, we all know, especially if we're dairy grazers, we tend to, we know those frequent moves for cattle. You can increase your forage utilization, intake, those
Oh,
types of
yeah.
things. But then there's the point where, where does it become impractical to move a polywire,
Oh, yeah.
3, 4 times a day, whatever, or more. Whereas if the polywire or the braking requires no labor, now, the sky's the limit on that, so we can
Oh,
set,
yeah.
we can set those cattle to shift to new grass, as many times as we want to across the course of a graze during the day or at night or whatever, and then still shift them to the parlor then when it's time to milk. So that's been a big deal for us to be able to, because we weren't big polywire users just for whatever reason. This wasn't really part of our model,
Yeah.
but now we're really embracing, the multiple, shifts through the course of the graze, which is exciting.
And I know you're working with a large number of cows, so it gives you some flexibility there on size. How small of area can those fence those virtual fence collars get cows down to without it being a problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. It allows you, like, on our, on the app on my phone, I can draw that real small, and I think the buffering might be like, if wherever the virtual line on the app is, there may be a meter or two on either side. There,
Oh, yeah.
that there's a little fluctuation in where those cows actually stop grazing. But it is pretty interesting, when you're grazing through some pretty tall grass or some more cover there, you draw that line. It's a pretty well defined line out through the
Oh,
grass
yeah.
where they stop at. But yeah, I mean, you could take that down to, you know I'm trying to think. We put some small broods of cattle in just a real tiny little area,
Oh, yeah.
or if you want to fence out a little, like a ditch or a sinkhole or something. You don't want the cattle to be near, a tree. You could draw around a tree anything like that. It's pretty detailed.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. How did you get your cows used to the collars and get that going? Was it a lot of transition and get them there, or did the cows take to it pretty naturally?
Yeah, it was actually a pretty easy process. There were two farms in the U.S. that were launching when we launched. Us and one other. They were putting them on some stalkers up in Oregon at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
So fortunately, which is not normally the case when a herd would start up, we had a person from Halter who was here on the ground. So he actually helped us collar,
Oh, yeah.
and then he was here to help walk us through the training, which was great to see his perspective and kind of have him take your hand on that. But yeah, really, as far as the virtual boundary, they start respecting or they're respecting that in 48 to 96 hours. I mean, it's
Oh, yes.
pretty
It
much,
doesn't
I
take
mean,
long.
what we would do is we went out the first evening. In fact, we collared cows. It took us a day and a half to collar the milking herd, and we were exhausted. And Peter, he said, "Oh, hey, we're going to be done in time. We can train cows this evening." Well, the last thing I want to do is train cows this evening.
Right.
So we go out, and it's pretty simple. We took a paddock, we took a poly wire, split the paddock in half, and then we drew the virtual boundary about 10 meters in front of the poly wire.
Oh, yeah.
So the cow had the opportunity to visually approach the poly wire and then experience the collar as she hit that virtual boundary before
Oh,
she
yeah.
got to it. So there was kind of a connection made there. And it was amazing. The next morning we went out and you could see, it was a little more jagged, but you could see a
Oh, yeah.
line 10 meters ahead of the poly wire. They're like, well, these girls are, they're experiencing the collar before they're grazing up to the fence. So we did that for 3 or 4 days, and then we removed the poly wire and watched them. And you can the other thing that's pretty cool is the cows show up on your phone as little color coded dots depending on
Uh,
what mob they're in, so you can see everything happening in real time. You can see if they're in the break or out of the break. and
oh, yeah.
and yeah, within a couple of days that was down. And then the virtual shifting takes them a little bit longer because the virtual boundary is the cows. Okay, I do something negative. I break the rules, so to speak, and I experience negative things. I cross the line, and
Oh, yeah.
whereas virtual shifting is, okay, I'm prompted to do this positive thing. An example, walking toward the milking parlor, and when I don't do that, I'm experiencing negative prompts. And then when I step into that and do what I'm supposed to, they go away. So it's almost like it's the training is kind of reversed for the cow from the
Mhm.
virtual boundary. So that took a little longer. That took probably 10 days, maybe, till
Oh, yeah.
but it wasn't bad. What we would do is we would initiate the shift on the app to shift the cows to parlor, and at the same time we would go out with the four-wheeler and do what we normally would do. So the cows are experiencing this prompt
Oh, yeah.
and seeing what they're used to. We
Yeah.
open the gate and we do the thing, and they would then they tie the two together, and then we would delay how long it would take for us to get. We would start the shift, and then we'd maybe show up 5 minutes later
Oh, yeah.
if they weren't started to come in, and just kept backing that off till they didn't need the prompting of what they saw in us to know that the shift was happening. And now they, it's almost now, well, they react more now to that than they do the four-wheeler. It used to be, you drive in the
Oh, yeah.
field and it's not shifting time, and they think it is just because the four-wheeler showed up.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's now they don't act that way anymore because they've associated, the collar and the tones
Yeah.
with the
Which,
shift.
which is nice because I can remember going out early to do something, and I have a couple cows show up at the barn. I'm like, "You'll go back out. It's not time yet."
Right. You're like, you didn't read the script. This isn't right.
Right. Yeah. I was out there doing something else. Couldn't you
Yeah.
tell?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Mhm. Now, are you only using the collars on your milking herd?
We're using it on the milking herd, and we also collared our breeding age heifer group because they would be grazing the main dairy grazing platform. Our goal was to everything that was going to spend time on the main platform, I figured would need to be collared so that,
Oh,
so we could remove fences like we wanted to, and really, allow all the groups to do that. Now, and we collar our heifers as well. The only group we've not collared yet is our bulls. They've done limited work with that over there because there's a lot more AI and a lot less bull herds,
yeah.
like you'd say. I mean, we run we were 100 bulls from our most mature down through to our smallest, and so I mean, they don't do that over there, so it really wasn't applicable. But that was one of my hang-ups when we were talking. Initially I said, I'm going to need to collar these bulls, and they said, well, I don't know if you can. And I said, well, I mean, we might need to try. So we're actually going to do some trial work with that this fall. We're gonna collar them. I think maybe we might have to put collars on a little bit more snugly, a little tighter, and it may mean more frequent adjusting. So we may have to modify our handling facilities to do that, if we in fact need to do that. I'm not sure at this point. That's all a big blank slate. We're not sure how that's going to go. It'd be great to collar them if they'll hold collars. But just because of the group is so much nicer to manage as a collar group. You can do things with them you can't do otherwise. But there's some question marks there, so we're going to kind of work through that this year, another month or so. We're going to start experimenting with that and see how it goes. But yeah, all the female groups from say 2 years and up are definitely called. Yep.
Oh, yeah. Are you having to adjust those collars very often?
We don't. It was interesting. The youngest ones we collared were our heifers when we first got started. And I was asking them about that, and they found that over there, if you're collaring them at like breeding age, it's amazing, I guess, how much the neck does not grow substantially in proportion to the body.
Oh, yes.
From what they said. And I said, well, makes sense. So, but has been the case. When we collared the cows, they have settings on the buckles, so it's easy to kind of tell where you're at when you're fastening it. They gave a recommended size that they use over there, and we started putting them on. That's going to be a little too loose or a little too tight, I'm afraid. So we kind of aired to the bigger side. Well, we had a few collars come off, maybe a half dozen. And it did seem like, I think we went back to kind of their recommendation on those, on their cows over there. And that's pretty close to, I think, where we are. So when we collared our heifers, we aired a little more that way, kind of a little, not a tight fit, but a little more snugly fit.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't had any of them come off, and we haven't had to adjust them yet either. So, we're monitoring that, but at this point we've not had to do any adjusting.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Well, I find the virtual fence very interesting. I'd love for it to get to a price point I could afford it, but I do find it very interesting. I think it's being such a young industry, it's going to mature or grow so rapidly. It's going to be really interesting to see where it goes and where the price ends up and stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's, the little bit that we've handled it, I feel pretty safe to say it's definitely one of the most powerful tools we've had hit the grazing industry
Oh yeah.
in my career for sure. And I think all of those things that you just said there, I think, yeah, I think there's that maturing process is probably going to happen pretty rapidly, I think.
Oh yeah. Let's shift gears just a little bit. We've talked about what you're doing, what's happened in the past. Where do you see the future going for you all?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And this is something that we think about and talk about is, especially in this area we find ourselves in the area of grazing dairy. First of all, grazing and dairying seems to be uncoupling a little more than what they used to be. I don't like that fact, but it seems like it's
Right.
true to a certain degree. It's hard to take a 600 cow grazing herd and make it a 3,000 cow grazing herd, which is what the industry is doing.
Oh yeah.
That's the consolidation and the herd size increases, and that's an impossibility with this model. We're limited at where we are. We're tied to the land base. That's going to dictate,
Oh yeah.
our herd size, and we're not going to change our model just to bring in more cows and work harder and all those sorts of things.
Right.
So, that's all great, but you look at the economics of where dairy's gone, a lot of dairy's economic model is expansion. That's,
Oh yeah, it is.
so, so how do we maintain a competitive cost of production with an ever increasingly consolidating industry where, those fixed costs continue to be driven lower and lower? And we've, purposely handicapped ourselves from that. Even how do we stay competitive? Because we want to stay competitive. We want to continue to operate this level. We like the family structure. We,
Yeah.
we do we do have 3 to 4 outside employees as well, but we still like that structure. So I don't know. We've looked at different types of markets. We're just on the commodity market. We're competing with all the milk out of Texas and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing special about our product from a marketing standpoint, even though maybe there should be. We've looked at their A2's getting bigger over here.
Oh yeah, it
Is,
is.
is
Yeah.
that it wouldn't be a big jump for us to I think if we started testing all of our replacement bulls we were keeping, I think in a few years it wouldn't take too long to be A2. That could be a potential. We've looked at value adding here. We don't have immediate plans to do that, but we sure have explored it. There's
Oh
no
yeah.
there's less than 50 dairies left in the state. There's no dairies within 120 miles of our place in any
Oh
direction.
yeah.
So everybody, there's a lot of interest, and we know where the consumer is today, right? I mean, they're really interested in where their food comes from, and
Right.
so we say, well, are we missing something here? I mean, what would it take for us to, market a pasteurized milk product, ice cream, tour people on the farm, all those types of things. We're open to that. We want to, I think before any of those steps would be taken, I think, it has to be done in a very business savvy, well researched, methodical way. But our family is to a point where our kids are out of the house, are kind of in that college phase and getting out, and maybe wanting to be part of the business here. But that's obvious. That's not going to be milking more cows. So are
Right.
all those things a possibility? They sure are. If none of them come to fruition, can we continue to, excuse me, ship, you know, commodity milk at this scale long term to stay competitive? Maybe. I mean, I'm not saying we can't. I would hate to write that off and say I would, you just have to get bigger or you got to get out. I don't think that's necessarily true. So I said all that to not answer your question probably very well at all, but
But
I will say it's something that we think about all the time.
oh yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I just know when I look at the commodity market on milk, I'm just shocked by how little it's changed from when we were shipping milk 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah, figuring that out. Ted, it's time we move to our famous four questions sponsored by Ken Cove Farm Fence. Ken Cove Farm Fence is a proud supporter of the Grazing Grass Podcast and grazers everywhere. At Ken Cove Farm Fence, they believe there's true value within the community of grazers and land stewards. The results that follow proper management and monitoring can change the very world around us. That's why Ken Cove is dedicated to providing an ever expanding line of grazing products to make your chores easier and your land more abundant. Whether you're growing your own food on the homestead or grazing on thousands of acres, Ken Cove has everything you need to do it well. From reels to tumblewheels, polytwine to electric nets, water valves to water troughs, you'll find what you're looking for at Ken Cove. They carry brands like Speedrite, O'Brien's, Kiwi Tech, Strainrite, Job, and more. Ken Cove is proud to be part of your regenerative journey. Call them today or visit kencove.com and be sure to follow them on social media and subscribe to the Ken Cove YouTube channel at Ken Cove Farm Fence for helpful how-to videos and new product releases. There are the same four questions we ask of all of our guests. And our first question, what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
That's a pretty easy question. I wish it was. I wish I could say I read books all the time. I really wish I read a lot more books than I do. And I know there's some great books on this topic that I know I could benefit from. But I will have to say, because you've added publication to that list and not just books, Gray's magazine was probably been
Oh,
the
yes.
most influential for me. I subscribed to that probably before we bought our first cow. And
Oh, yes.
just over the years, reading what producers talk about, what's worked, what hasn't, really have a lot of respect for Joel McNair and his philosophy and what his vision for grazing, even specifically grazing dairies been over the years, and just can't say enough about that publication. Of course, it's changed hands now, and I think it's in very good hands now as well.
Yes.
But that's one I recommend to anybody who's looking to get into the business or isn't currently subscribed to.
Yeah. Graze is an excellent resource there. Yes. Our second question, what's your favorite tool for the farm?
Well, that's probably changed over the years, as we've been able to grow some and get a little more efficient on some of our, and I hate to say machinery because we try to run away from machinery even though
Oh,
we have
yeah.
machinery. But as we've grown over the years, several years ago we got a swather for cutting our hay, which has really streamlined that process. But that maybe was my favorite tool before we started collaring cows. And I
Oh,
got to
yes.
say, the collars are just that's gonna be that'd be a tough one to live without. So they'd be our favorite tool at this point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So very exciting times because that's a recent introduction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thirdly, what would you tell someone just getting started?
I'd probably tell them a couple things, and when you think of someone in that context, just getting started, I remember that really well because this is not an environment I grew up in, and I remember stepping out into this, what that felt like, and I would take as I would get time away from my day job, I'd run off to pasture walks or grazing workshops and things like that. And I remember one time I was at a grazing workshop and the guy that stood up and talked, I don't remember the topic was, but there was like a dry race board or something there. And he stood up, didn't say anything. He just wrote the words confidence in grass and underlined it. And I thought that's kind of odd. And then he talked from there and he said, you will not be successful as a grazer if you can't learn to have an appreciation and understanding for the nutritional value of quality grazed forage and what it can do for the performance of an animal in a relatively economic way. You have to develop that confidence. It's not just, let the cows out before they come back in for the rest of their feed. It's
Oh,
they're
yeah.
they're out there for a purpose. So you have to really develop a faith, maybe along with maybe that's a better way. of putting it in. So that would be something I would, just because it stuck in my mind, would be some advice for a young person. And the other thing I would say is mentorship is probably the best thing you can do. I've spent a lot of time with guys that are way older than enough to be my dad. And I have learned a lot from those guys, guys that have experienced ups and downs in the business before I was born. And those types of folks have some real value. And I think that anyone who would be venturing off into this would do well to identify and hook up with a good mentor.
Yeah, two excellent pieces of advice there for someone getting started. And lastly, Ted, where can others find out more about you?
Well, I'm actually myself not on social media at all. Our dairy is. You could look up Delta Dairy on Facebook. We don't have a website at this point. Like I said, we're not. We're talking about doing that type of thing possibly. If we're going to become more of a direct marketer type thing. But you can find us there, and I have an email. I guess I could give you that to put in the notes. Any kind of personal contact information, phone number, email, I'd be glad to respond to anyone who'd like to reach out. But I'm a little bit old school in some of that stuff. My wife's on social media, but I'm not.
I know when I had a listener reach out and say, hey, contact Ted. He'd be a great guest on the podcast. So I went to try and find out more information about you. And I found there's not a whole lot out there, but I did find on the Louisiana Grazing Land Coalition, they have a video about your dairy that was made a few years ago, which I thought was really good and gave me more information. So there's a place for more information as well.
I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot about that. Yeah, that would be a great place for sure. You could check that out on YouTube. Yeah.
Well, Ted, we appreciate you coming on and sharing today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation. Always like to talk about this kind of stuff, and had a great time. Thanks for the invite.
Wonderful. I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I know I did. Thank you for listening. And if you found something useful, please share it. Share it on your social media. Tell your friends. Get the word out about the podcast. Helps us grow. If you happen to be a grass farmer and you'd like to share about your journey, go to grazinggrass.com and click on Be Our Guest. Fill out the form and I'll be in touch. We appreciate your support by sharing our episodes and telling your friends about it. You can also support our show by buying our merch. We get a little bit back from that. Another way to support the show is by becoming a Grazing Grass Insider. Grazing Grass Insiders enjoy bonus content, monthly Zooms, and discounts. You can visit the website, grazinggrass.com, click on support, and they'll have the links there. Also, if you haven't left us a review, please do. It really helps us as people are searching for podcasts. And I was just checking them, and we do not have very many reviews for 2024. So if you haven't left us a review, please do. And until next time, keep on grazing grass.